Tell us why you were so convinced that the moon landing was a hoax, and what gave you this idea that it was a hoax?
Well, I grew up as the biggest supporter of the moon landings. My dad was in the Air Force. He was an officer. He got a packet at the time of the alleged moon landings of publicity 9x12 color pictures. I had them up on my wall for 10 years, saw them every day from the age of 4 to 14, which is 3,650 times. And then I saw a television show with this gentleman by the name of William Casing on it. He worked as a contractor for Rocketdyne during the Apollo program for 6 years. He had very high security clearances because he would edit communications going from the top generals back and forth to correct their grammar and everything so they wouldn't look immature. And so he saw a classified memo from von Braun, who said the odds of going to the moon successfully on the first attempt with 1960s technology was a 1 in 10,000 chance. And so he saw all these departments being shuffled around all the time. Just as soon as somebody got their full understanding of what they were doing, they would shuffle everybody around. They were doing departmentalization, so no one could see the full picture, that the equipment certainly couldn't do it. I mean, here's the simplest proof. It's simply logical. What they're claiming is that they went 1,000 times farther than they can send astronauts today, 50 years ago, on the first attempt with 1/1,000,000th the computing power of a cell phone. I mean, when they flew across the Atlantic for the first time, a few years later, hundreds of aircraft and thousands of aircraft were flying across the Atlantic. When they went to the North Pole and South Pole here on Earth, they never made it the first attempt. It took multiple times. And there's never been a technological achievement that no one could repeat 50 years later. It's like me telling you 50 years ago, Toyota made a car that could go 50,000 miles on a gallon of gasoline. And yet today, 5 decades later, their best car can only go 50 miles per gallon, or 1,000th the distance. You would laugh and say the original claim is preposterous. And so here we are 50 years later, and now the farthest they can send an astronaut to the moon is 1,000th the distance that they claimed to have done on the first attempt 50 years ago with less computing power than a cell phone, 1/1,000,000th of the computing power. It just doesn't add up. It's the only technological achievement that could not be repeated 50 years later. It's never happened. It's also the only time that they deliberately destroyed a technology. I mean, the B-52 is 70 years old, and there's still 200 of them in service. And yet they admit they destroyed all the Apollo equipment, and they're claiming they have to go back to the moon and recreate it from scratch. They destroyed all the original videotapes, all the original blueprints. You would never do that if you really went. You would only do that if there was a fraud and you were trying to cover your tracks.
So if you like this little short clip from an interview I did, click over here to watch the entire interview. And please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.